Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and this is the very last What's Next video in the entire series, the final team that I will be covering out of all 30 teams across the NBA, and it is the NBA champion Toronto Raptors. And congrats to them on winning the championship. It was an outstanding accomplishment for the team and for the city, and it was a really enjoyable run to see them just kind of develop the way they did over the course of the season and throughout the playoffs. And they actually have a really interesting situation moving forward, whether it's this offseason or the following. Obviously, a lot of the attention is going to be focused on what Kawhi Leonard does this offseason, and that's certainly going to be the first domino in terms of where they go from here. But they do actually have a lot of options. So let's go ahead and see what's next for the Toronto Raptors. So as I did with the Warriors video, it seems a little bit pointless to go through the building blocks one by one like I've done for other teams in the series, just because you guys all already know who all these players are. It's everybody that was in the rotation in the finals, and then OG Anunoby as well when he gets back and is healthy. So it seems a little bit pointless for me to go through one by one the building blocks. So I'm just going to get straight into what their options are for the offseason. So like I said in the intro, everything is going to depend on what Kawhi Leonard does in free agency, because obviously the Toronto Raptors did just about as much as they possibly could to make a case for themselves as a long-term option for Kawhi to be able to re-sign and come back to Toronto. And it sounds like it's between them and the Clippers, because throughout this entire process, it's been maintained through reports that Kawhi wants to play in LA, and most specifically, he wants to play for the Clippers. Now, it's clear that the Clippers have a great situation, and Kawhi made no promises to Toronto that he was going to re-sign, and they knew that when they traded for him, so he doesn't really owe them anything. And honestly, I think he is probably still going to end up leaving, because I think he, KD, and LeBron are probably the only three players in the entire league that would actually leave their team this season, or the summer at least, after winning a championship. So even though, like I said, Toronto did so many things right to try and convince Kawhi to stay, personally, I just think his desire to play in LA and play for the Clippers has been so consistent throughout this entire year-plus long process of going from the Spurs to the Raptors that I just don't really see him giving up on that, even though they did win the championship. But obviously, I don't have any insider knowledge or anything. This is just speculation based off things that I'm reading. So let's just go ahead and get right to what their options are, depending on what Kawhi does. So as you look at their free agency, they're at about $131 million in team payroll for next season, which is obviously well over the cap. But that includes a player option for Kawhi as well as for Marc Gasol, and obviously Kawhi is going to decline his option. And then if Gasol does as well, suddenly the Raptors are about $20 million plus underneath the salary cap, but the cap holds of those two players as well as Danny Green prevents them from actually having any cap space unless they renounce the rights to those players. But that also assumes that Gasol is going to opt out of that $25 million for next season, which I'm not sure that he will, just because that's a lot of money for him at this point in his career. But those are the only three significant free agents that the Raptors have this offseason. So in the first scenario, let's just say that Kawhi decides to come back and he re-signs. From there, it's pretty simple. They bring back the same group that they just won the championship with. They bring back Gasol either because he opts into his player option or they sign him to a longer-term deal. They bring back Danny Green as well. And then they've got everybody else that just played in the finals coming back next season. Every single other player other than those three free agents is going to be on the team next year and is under contract. So they can run it back and be one of, if not the favorites to win the championship again next year if Kawhi wants to come back. And then on top of that, if OG Anunoby gets healthy, that would be another really important piece for them in their rotation to add depth, which is really awesome for them. And then they go into the summer of 2020 where they have a lot of free agents. Now, it depends on the contracts that they give to Danny Green and to Marc Gasol, and then obviously Kawhi getting the max as well. But you can see that important players like Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam are going to need new contracts in the summer of 2020. But if they wanted to, again, assuming Kawhi comes back, they could just re-sign all those guys, maybe bring back Kyle Lowry and Serge Ibaka, or maybe let them walk. It doesn't really matter. But then they could bring back, like I said, Siakam and VanVleet and just have this exact same core again moving forward. However, the other option here would be to kind of let some of the older guys walk. Like, let's just say that Gasol opts in and then they sign Danny Green to a one-year deal. They could go into the summer of 2020, re-sign Siakam and VanVleet. Obviously, Kawhi would be on his max, and then let everybody else walk, that being Kyle Lowry and Ibaka and Green and Gasol. And suddenly, they've got that core three of players in Siakam, Kawhi, and VanVleet. And then they've got max cap space as well in the summer of 2020 to bring in even more help for Kawhi and those other two. So basically, they're set up extremely well for the future. They can bring back the same group next year and then potentially have max contract space in the summer of 2020, depending on what they're able to re-sign Siakam and VanVleet for. And that would be my pitch to Kawhi. If I was trying to convince him to stay, if I was in the front office in Toronto, I would just say, hey, you're going into kind of an unknown situation with the Clippers. They certainly have assets. They certainly have a bright future, but you don't know what other free agents you're going to be able to bring in. You don't really know that organization, the coaching staff, the front office. There's just a lot of unknown there, whereas if you look at what we have, we can bring back the exact same group that you just won a championship with, and the landscape of the NBA could be different next year. Obviously, AD's in LA, and there's all these other things, but you have to look at it and say that we are the favorites again next year, especially with Golden State dealing with injuries, and then even after that, we can roll into 2020 with max cap space and get you a max free agent, just like LA can this offseason, but there's no unknown with us. You know that we can do that. You don't really know what you're going into in LA. That would be my pitch personally. Like, this is a proven championship level core. The city loves you. You have a good relationship with the front office and the coaching staff. We'll have max cap space in 2020. Why not just come back to Toronto? And all that sounds great, but again, it just kind of seems like his desire to play in LA has been a very consistent thing throughout this entire process. So now let's move on to some scenarios where Kawhi does end up leaving. What do the Raptors do then? Well, at that point, they're probably looking at a youth movement focused around VanVleet and Siakam. They would hopefully have Gasol opt out of his player option and let him walk and let Danny Green walk as well. Obviously, Kawhi would opt out and leave. And then they've just got a ton of cap space to potentially go after some good young players this offseason. Maybe they throw a relatively big offer at someone like Malcolm Brogdon to give them another good young piece. And then they roll forward from there with their young guys and focus once again on 2020 free agency. Not that I think they're going to get a max player to go around like Siakam and VanVleet, because that's not a ton to build around. At least for a star when they're looking at it. These guys want to play with other stars, but they have that flexibility in 2020, and that's the important thing about this entire situation as I go over this one and the following scenario. The Raptors went into this knowing that it was a possibility that Kawhi was going to end up leaving, and they positioned themselves well to be able to, quote-unquote, blow it up and kind of restart around a couple of core pieces like OG and VanVleet and Siakam with all that cap space in 2020. And then even going into next year, they're still going to have Kyle Lowry. They're going to be a playoff team, assuming that they keep him and then everybody stays healthy. They should still be able to make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference and then focus a little bit more big picture in 2020 when guys like Lowry come off the books. Now, the other option here, because they're going to have so much cap space in 2020, is to take maybe a little bit more of a longer term approach to this and use players like Ibaka and Kyle Lowry, use their big expiring contracts to take on bigger salaries going into the summer of 2020 to use up their cap space that way in order to help other teams and get them out from under those big contracts by using those expirings, using those as assets, and then getting back some picks and some assets in return. That's another kind of option they can go with if they want to focus a little bit more on the long term. And so either way, even though this certainly is not as exciting as scenario one, the Raptors do have some options. They do have some good young pieces. They have a ton of flexibility, and they're going to be fine. And I think that's the important thing to focus on. And teams are starting to get smarter about this. I was talking about this on the podcast the other day with Funky. It's not so much a all or nothing thing anymore with free agency, with certain teams going into the offseason with all this cap space and nothing else. Certain teams still do that, like the Lakers are going to be doing moving forward, and the Knicks this offseason as well. But whether it's the Celtics losing Kyrie or the Raptors potentially losing Kawhi or the Clippers going into this offseason, all these teams are getting smarter about how they're doing free agency as it relates to superstars. Whether they go into free agency and they're like, hey, if we strike out and we don't get a big star, it's okay, we're going to be fine, we still have these guys to build around. Or in this situation, or the Celtics situation, if they end up losing a superstar, a big free agent, in the past that would have been like a doomsday scenario, especially for teams like Toronto that typically don't get very many shots at a superstar. They're going to be fine still, and I would applaud them as well as other teams for getting smarter about this, and they always knew that this was a possibility. It was a risky move at the time. Everybody knew it. Everybody knew that it was possible that Kawhi would leave, even though they didn't end up winning the championship. I think it's a very realistic possibility that he's going to play in LA next year, and if I was a betting man, that would be where my money would be personally, is that he would end up with the Clippers next offseason, but they position themselves to be just fine, and they should be applauded for that. But as always, with seemingly everything in the NBA offseason, there could be some unforeseen things that end up happening that shake this entire situation up. But either way, it's going to be interesting to see them either build around Kawhi with another championship level group, or maybe focus on some of the younger guys. But that is going to be it with the What's Next series. That is going to be the end of it. 30 different videos on every single team across the NBA in terms of what they have planned for this offseason, what is potentially next for them. Obviously, some of them are done at different times of the offseason. Some of them were done in the playoffs. Some of them were done post-lottery. This one's being done after the draft, but it was a lot to go through. It was a lot to talk about every single team and kind of research and gather my thoughts on every single team. But I appreciate all the support on this series. That really helped me push through to complete this and go through every single team. And I hope you guys enjoyed it, even if maybe you didn't agree on my opinions on every single team or on your team specifically. I still appreciate the sport, and I really appreciate you guys continuing to watch the videos. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time. That was pitiful.